Welcome to An Archbender's Journal, The Last Will of Lucy Sutton. I'm your host, Terrence Franklin. In each episode, we go on an odyssey to discover my family history, and I invite guests to share their stories to bend the arc of history with their own legacy. You can find the show through YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Now please, join me for An Archbender's Journal, The Last Will of Lucy Sutton. I'm your host, Terry Franklin. Welcome to An Archbender's Journal. It's a Friday afternoon, and I'm so excited here to have my guest, Selina Thomas. I joked last time with one of my last guests that the sort of unofficial title of this show is Terry gets to hang out with some of his favorite people. So I'm glad to have you on today.
Thank
As one of my
you.
favorite people. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you. And I'm glad to be one of those people. You are absolutely mine. And I was excited because we're headed into a Memorial Day weekend, and this is so apropos to be talking about legacy and going into this kind of weekend and then our own opportunities to create.
Yes, we are, and so let's just jump into it.
Yeah.
I know you describe yourself as a mother, businesswoman, political candidate, and advocate for people. Why don't you tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about each one of those? Give us a little mommy brag and your
Yeah.
business. Yeah, what's going
Yeah,
on?
I think that's the thing I put first. I think when we met, we talked about our girls. We talked about uh, why we do what we do and who we do it for. And so I'm a mom of three girls, phenomenal, each and every one of them on their own, and then combined, it just becomes this super light that happens when I'm walking down the street with them. And so um, Mia is 19, just got back from the University of Portland, first year academic scholar. Super proud of her, made Dean's List. Madison is an amazing, already business owner at 23, model designer extraordinaire. And often the things that you see me in is, stitched by Maddie, thank God. And then I have a 17-year-old who's going into her senior year, Morgan, who is really destined to be president. Of all of them, she really is the natural leader and the one that is kind of the sleeper in terms of, even though she's the youngest, she has been very observant of everything and is like, I'm going to use that, I'm going to use that, and I'm going to take it and make it my own. And so I'm super excited about where she's headed. And so that kind of just allows me to then go, okay, I need to set some goals for myself for the next phase of this because the heavy lifting's done. And so that's how I got into what I'm doing now, which is business, community, politics.
You know, I'm also like you said, as you said, when we first met, we talked about our daughters, and they're such a source of constant inspiration, a reminder of the possibilities and the opportunity
Yeah,
that you should grab, no matter how old you are, no matter where you are in
yeah,
your life. And I'm so
yeah,
fortunate to have children in my life who are able to inspire me and reflect that.
yes.
So
Hmm.
I know your children helped inspire you to
Hmm.
push forward, and you got one who's a business person, but you are intensely involved in your own business, 6 Degrees
I
HR
am.
Consulting. Tell us about that business and what does it mean? How does it work? What do you do?
Yes, thank you. And 6 degrees, that's what connects us globally. So it was a really important uh, to name it something that it was really the essence of the company. So I provide HR, outsourced HR for small to medium sized businesses. And our community that I live in, Santa Clarita, California, is really fertile soil for businesses, especially family owned businesses. So all those things connect to me. I'm a family owned business, a small business, and I'm a business that really helps support businesses' existence when it comes to the people in
Mm.
terms of HR. That's really the human capital is the most expensive, the most vulnerable, and obviously the one that needs to be cultivated and supported by a specialist. So that's what I do. I'm a specialist in HR. I'm nationally certified. I have companies all over the country and in Bordeaux, France, and I had the great pleasure of going to Bordeaux last year with Madison,
Oh
and
la la!
the champagne company. Exactly. It's like not a bad gig if you can get it, right? So it really translates to a lot of industries. So I get to meet, like you and your travels, different people, different spaces and industries, and it just truly enriches my life. I think when we met, we talked about not just our kids, but just the love of people. And this, industry, humans first in HR, gives me that. It feeds my soul. So it doesn't ever feel like work. It feels
Wow.
like I'm going to see my friends who have a business and they need my help. And that's how it grew for me. And it's really all connected to my purpose. And so when you put those things together, and I have people that follow me just like you, they go, do you ever not work? I'm like, I'm always around people, and these people become part of my life, from uh, business owners that become true friends and supporters of my goals and of my girls. And it's just a great combination of who I already am, just translated into my purpose.
You really, I think taking all your identities and pulling them together and using them in an organic way to be your best self.
Yeah.
And just so I'm a little clear, I can imagine, I'm a small business owner. We have a small firm, 10 lawyers, and we do have, office staff and a person who's responsible for personnel. But
Mm-hmm.
the amount of time that it takes within our firm to get the personnel stuff done and to deal with all the
Mm-hmm.
HR issues, compliance with California regulations, and all of that
Yes.
stuff, we do it in house. But I could certainly see how someone who is really focused on trying to provide a product or a service wants to focus on that and not to have to deal with the minutia,
Outsource it.
important
Mm-hmm.
minutia of human
Very much
resources.
so.
And is that what you do? You kind of come in and be
Absolutely.
that arm in the firm within the company?
I'm really the long spoon between you, the business owner, and those things. Because sometimes also, and this really is something I say at the onset, sometimes you're too close. You need a neutral person. You're almost, you can't see the forest through the trees kind of thing. And because of the dynamics of small businesses that's often family, you don't want someone to imply that you are too close and that you have bias or favoritism or nepotism. So when a business owner calls me, they're making sure that that's off the table, that that's not, besides all the other things that they need with someone that does what I do. They will also want to just really make sure they put some distance between any tough decision, any compliance issue, give it to the specialist. We get to that sweet spot where, like me, I'm going to give this to my accountant because they're going to do my books, because that's not my lane. And so it's the same with business owners who really work above board in terms of engaging someone that is a specialist. Like, not only do I not want to do it, but I want to make sure that the person I give it to is good at it, and that's their specialty and their scope. It speaks volumes to an employee when they've engaged someone on their behalf to make sure they're doing things right. That's really when we introduce what I do and who I am to the company. That's how the buy-in happens, because they're saying we're thoughtful enough to know that this isn't an area that we want to get wrong, because you're the most important element of our company.
That's excellent, because I'm sure the employees respect that as a
Yes.
acknowledgement of the importance of HR, because it's
Yes.
easy enough to ignore it, or
Yes.
to not do
Google
it
guessed it.
right and get
Yeah.
fined.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah,
okay.
and then someone's on the other end of that, and that is the employee. And so we're dealing with clients that are thoughtful in that regard. And then, of course, not everyone can do the people part, right? There's things that you could do technically, right? We're all past certain things. You pass the bar, pass the PHR. We can do those things with our eyes closed, but not everybody can do the people part. And that's really signature to me, signature to my brand. And I really, um, at that point, with all the things we talked about, I have agency
Right.
in my life, and that translates in my work, in the passion that I have for small businesses.
Well, you're people driven and human driven interests and focus, I think, led you into another fascinating area. You're the first guest
Yeah.
I've had on who actually has been a political candidate and is a political candidate.
Yes.
Why don't you tell me about tell me about your political experience and what your
Sure.
expectations and hopes are for what's coming next.
Yes, thank you. And really, it really was, to your point, very organic. So I'll backtrack. I was actually an intern for Nate Holden when I was in college. I was kind of checking a box for some courses that I was taking, and I was either going to have to write a paper or be an intern for 4 months. So I was like, okay, I can be an intern. And so I, at that time, was thrust into what was the aftermath for his office of the LA riots,
Mhm.
if you remember that period of time. And he needed boots on the ground for what the needs of recovery for his district was so that he can ask for federal funding. I'm giving a long way around the park because ultimately what happened was he sent me to DC as an advocate for his district for the federal matching funds to recover his district businesses. Their
Wow.
businesses that had been burned, had been greatly impacted because there was no commerce happening. And so it was check the box, but suddenly this was, whoa, I'm at the White House at an empowerment conference standing in between President Clinton and Al Gore, this girl from Chino, what just happened? But I
Mhm.
also realized that in looking back, in hindsight, I was chosen for not just my ability to articulate what those needs were of his office, but my ability to be passionate about him because it the funding receiving it was predicated on the pitch. It was predicated on what do you see that we need to give because that's how we're going to fund this. So
Mhm.
fast forward, and so I checked the box. I had the experience, and it was wonderful. I had no political aspirations. It was at that time an experience that I could certainly use, speak to, and amplify as I was finding my way professionally. Left that situation, became ultimately a social worker, and again, always centered around people, but realized that wasn't for me in that space because it was kind of stealing my soul, seeing certain things and engaged in traumatic events for people on their worst days with their children. At the time that I was having children was a no. And so I got into HR after that because I was already supervising people and they said, well, we'll pay for your HR masters if you stay with us for 2 years. I can still deal with people. I am still helping people and I'm in a lane that I'm better suited for. So the evolution then leads to I have this company, 6 Degrees, been practicing for 6 years in Santa Clarita. COVID hits. My clients, all small businesses, are the most impacted. When this crisis hit, this is who got hit hardest. They said, can you please run for city council? We have more years to recover if we don't have a voice there. Now you rewind to the crisis with the riots. It's the same concerns, same in my now era of being able to help in a space that I've been now practicing in, immersed in, and that's how it happened. It's really a long story, but you could see the evolution of it making perfect sense. And I
Sometimes you
was at a space that I could do that. Mhm.
sometimes you have to get to a place and look back. It's always nice to think about, I'm going to set
Yeah.
this goal out there and that's where I'm going to get to. But it doesn't always follow that path. Sometimes you have to get to
Mhm.
where you are and then look back and go, there was a reason
Oh,
I was at intern for Nate Holden. There was a reason why I took that class in college in interpretation of literature because one day I was going to have to be telling stories. It's that kind of thing that if
yes.
you open yourself to these opportunities and to hear what the universe has for you, here
Mm.
you are.
Becomes so loud. It becomes just really ultimately the purpose. And you have to give way to that when it becomes clear. And it really got really loud in this last cycle. And I got better at communicating not just the issues of our constituency here, but how I could provide solutions to them with the experiences, with the even the ones that I didn't want, right? Even the experiences that I didn't necessarily sign up for, I could still use them. And that's really why it was important for me to then see the bigger picture, because then I started to look at the landscape of our community and the lack of representation. I would be and will be, had I one last cycle, the first African American to ever sit in this seat in this city. Yes,
Wow.
yes. And
Um,
so we're dealing with a qualified candidate, right? That has purpose, that's also going to allow this community to reflect the diversity that's here
right.
and
Because
so
Santa
many other
Clarita is,
things.
it's not like Santa Clarita is uh,
Yes,
without us being there. So we need to be represented in politics and making
absolutely.
those decisions.
Absolutely.
That's
So
great.
then it
And
became really more resonant for me at that point, because these were things that were coming to me as I was running, that they were like, oh, you're the, I had a reporter, you're the black candidate. And I said, whoa, let's be clear. I'm a qualified candidate, happens to be African American and Filipino, right? But I don't just represent that. I represent so many other things. And this is where, as a candidate, as a person, your job is to help people get to know you. That is your job, so that when it's time to make a decision, you provided them the information that they need to check that box and say, this person, whether it's Black, Filipino, business owner, mother, homeowner, there's a lot of things, a lot of attributes to me that that align with this community and who lives here. So it's not just about the diversity, it's about um, the qualifications that I bring to the table of service that I'm doing with my business, in the philanthropy that I'm involved in. I'm very active in my community, from the educational landscape, being a board member for Wish Education. On the business side, I'm a board member for Valley Industry Association. I'm in Serothimus and Zanta. These are our international women's organizations that advocate for women and girls internationally. All of those things are actually represent my core values. So it's very easy to be engaged in that. And so this is what you would want in your representation.
you if you go to your Instagram page, you see that you are everywhere all the time, connecting with people, all over the
Yes.
community, people who are like, yes, yes, yes. And, for somebody who first time out was running for office in a community and getting to know people, you did an amazing job, but you've got the big job coming up ahead in
Yes.
2024, right?
More to
So,
do. Yes.
so what do you think are the big challenges that you face for the upcoming election, and what do you think you can bring to the table? Here's a chance for you to speak to people about
Yeah.
what you can do that you're going to bring to the Santa Clarita community.
Well, thank you. And there's so many kind of variables that are still in motion. So this is the first cycle that our community is actually districting. Prior, I ran at large, and now they have committed to settling to comply with the California Voter Rights Act, which means the municipality must district, and this allows um, fair representation. So there's a lot of momentum towards inclusion and having candidates be able to run in a fair play, right? Our municipality has had the same city council for 20 plus years, for almost as long as the community has existed. Yes. So
There's some
just educating people on that.
old tired ideas that are being recirculated around and around just by nature
We,
of
by
inertia.
virtue of the fact that there's been no succession, there's been, and listen, I'm a business owner, and we recognize, and you as a firm owner understand, that succession is part of good business, and succession should be applicable in city government. That's why we vote. That's why
Right.
we, right? But if you're recycling, if you have somebody that's been a mayor 5 times in the same city, just because by default now we've got to go back around, and this is what it looked like. So first of all, what's next is that this landscape is going to be completely different. This is the first cycle. in 2024 that this district will. So I'm two things. I'm waiting on what district I fall in. And the second is, when does that district run, in the general election or midterms? So all of those variables dictate when I run, where I'm representing. And so we are waiting for that. We have proposed lines right now. We have, and so you have to stay ready, right? Because if it's
That's what we got
24,
to do.
I'm ready.
Follow you.
I have to stay
We
ready.
gotta, you got to stay ready, and we have to follow you. We
Stay
have to
ready.
know where you are, so we can be ready
Yes.
to go with you.
Keep asking, and I have to keep showing up. And that's the key. So if it's 2024, I'm ready, no matter what district it is, right? Because ultimately on the dais, all 5 members that are made up represent the entire city. This
Right.
just narrows it down to, I campaign in district blah, 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 right? Whatever that is. And so that also allows for me to reach my constituency in my district much more accessible,
Yeah,
because
that's going to be much more
we've
efficient that you
narrowed it.
reach people than talk to the people who are really going to be voting for you,
Yes,
who need to
they're my
have
neighbors.
a voice, right? Exactly.
Yes. And so that's key. And so what is going to happen differently, to your question, is that I will be able to refine my focus to my district. What are the issues nuanced to that district that I can um, hear first and lend solutions to, in my experience, in my travels, in my again, I'm a constituent first, in my own experiences as a constituent, as your neighbor. And so, having raised my kids here, built a business, I'm a homeowner. I've created and saved jobs because of my work in the business sector, in my scope of practice. So any of that is going to be applicable to the people in my district, but there are going to be things that are going to be specific. Listen, we're having these HOA issues over here that, maybe not be applicable in another district, or there's some prevalence of certain things that are specific. And so that's where I love to get out, hear people, meet people. And so, this is why you see me everywhere all the time. So the
Well,
topography here it's 15 square miles, so it does allow me to kind of be from here to here pretty quickly, but that is definitely helpful.
I'm excited and looking forward to seeing you all over the place.
Yeah.
And I, one thing that came to mind, I know that you said one of your favorite quotes is, "Not all people that you argue with are your enemy, and not everyone that helps you are your friends." And I'm thinking, as a politician who's in the neighborhood, is in the community, that probably resonates a lot. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, how do we reach
Yes.
out and touch those people who we think
Yeah.
we disagree with?
I that when the question was asked, and that came to mind, really top of mind, was because of the experience in my last campaign and candidacy. And there are people that do kind of come forward, kind of in those periods of time, to kind of almost tether themselves to the work that you've done and the message, and almost become amplified because of that, but don't have really good intentions. And
Mm.
that was just, it's kind of discoverable when you don't win, and then you don't see them, and then you don't, right? And so that's when it became really clear to me. And so that was a huge lesson learned for me in this process, that, all of it, right? We talked earlier, good or bad is going to be used, right? We all had that grandma that made bone soup that was like, I'm putting this in the pot and we all going to eat it. It's still going to be good. It's the same thing.
Right.
And I learned that in this process. And as much as I'm engaged with people and have been in all of my professional career, you're still learning things about people in this, especially in this landscape. It is very tricky. And so I keep my circle small, and you know that because you're part of it. And we have a very small circle that is clear and purposeful and intentional in what we do, authentic and sincere. And so I can recognize that, and of course keep the wagons close, if you will. And I'm protecting a lot of people, not just myself, but my 3 girls. And this is voluntary for me, but they're being voluntold in
Right.
in in being in tow with me. And so I'm very mindful of that.
That's
So
amazing.
it's the purpose.
And
Yeah.
uh, I'm going. You mentioned Nate Holden. We're going to Nate Holden Performing Arts Center this weekend to see Ain't Misbehavin'.
Pasadena.
Uh,
Oh,
in
I just saw Chris last
South
week.
LA.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah. So,
I
but
just saw Chris, his son, last week, full circle
oh
moment.
yeah.
He was at
Aw.
the Taste of the Town, and he actually had just announced that he is running for the Board of Supervisors seat. He's currently the highest ranking assemblyman in our state. I don't know if people know that, but he's terming out in assembly. So he is coming back down and ready to serve in the supervisor's seat. And so he announced his run. We had a great chat out at Taste of the Town. And of course, when things kick up for you, Chris, I'm there. And in reverse, he said the same thing. And we shared pictures of me and his dad um, during an event. And so now I have a picture, I'll have to send it to you, of me and Chris and me and Nate 25 years ago. And so
Wow.
forgive the bangs, but it was really great to see him.
Well, I forgive my bangs too.
We all did it once upon a time, but yeah, I tell my girls, don't judge.
Don't judge. Time flies,
Yeah.
and styles change. Um,
Yes.
but the long term
Hmm.
is really the arc of history. That's what this show is
Yes.
about. It's about trying to look at the ways that those who came before us helped to provide us with suggestions and ideas and ways to move forward in a way that's positive. And your life really is an example of trying to bend the arc of history towards justice. But before I go, I always
Mm.
ask my guests if they either have something that they in particular are doing to try to bend the arc of history towards justice, or some way that they'd like to suggest that others might be able to try to activate themselves and have agency on that front. What would you say if I were
Yeah.
going to ask you about bending the arc of history towards justice?
That you need to be mindful that you're on the shoulders of people, right? My grandpa used to say all the time, this road was dirt when I walked on it and I paved it for you. Your job is to put lights on it for your girls and give them direction and recognize that um, that is the way to honor the legacy of our family. And so I think if people always have that front of mind, and this is why we were so connected immediately, is because of that legacy that you had found and fought for and had really brought forward for people to really understand how important it is. It resonated with me because I'm always thinking in that way, that it it may not make sense right now to you, but ultimately when I'm gone and you're talking to my grandkids or my grandkids, that my life was meaningful for you and for others. And I take great pride in that, in everything that I'm doing, and I'm very intentional about that, so that that's represented in the way that honored my grandfather, my father, my grandmother. And so it's important. This is why we have those pictures behind us, right? Because they're always around us. I'm looking at yours. Dr. Thomas is here, who is a huge influence for
Tell
me.
me a
And
little
so
bit about him. I know we were going
yeah,
to go already, but I know you mentioned that
yeah,
he's a huge influence on you. And
huge.
tell me about who that man
Yeah.
was.
Huge trailblazer. He went to the Philippines at 19 as an Air Force man as a way to avoid going to the front lines of Vietnam. Met and married my mother there. Filipino woman in this GI bar, saw her and was just completely enamored. And it really was his fearlessness that it stays with me. He rode the bus for 6 months to learn how to speak Tagalog to her because he was like, I have one shot, and if I blow it, right? And I could tell she doesn't understand the language, so I need to, and watched her until he could really articulate who he was to her. That was powerful, and it stays with me. And it's his story of how we came into the world, but it was because of his fearlessness, and that is always been something that I remain steadfast about. And so he ultimately became an air traffic controller, went on strike in 1980, became an educator with the GI Bill, was a principal, and retired as superintendent. So his whole mindset was never be afraid of evolving, be fearless about it, and own the experiences in a way that serve you and serve others.
Wow, Dr. Gene Thomas,
Yeah,
that's your dad. So
Dr. Gene Thomas.
um,
Yeah,
hats off to him
thank
and to
you.
the inspiration that he provided you, that you are
Yeah,
then sharing with your children and those who aren't your direct children, but who see by your example opportunities to grow and be the best person you can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Thank
been
you
great
so much.
talking to you.
Go so fast always, and I thank you so much.
Have a great Memorial Day weekend, and we
Thank
look forward to
you.
seeing you sometime this summer. And best of luck
Yes.
with your next outing. We'll all be following and rooting for you.
Thank you so much. Mwah. Blessings
Take
to you
care.
guys.
Best to
Have a
you.
good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to an Archbender's Journal, The Last Will of Lucy Sutton. I've been your host, Terrence Franklin. You can find this show through YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Thank you for your positive feedback, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.